Welcome, everyone. Thanks for joining our Fireside chat. Those of you who don't know us or unaware, we're the Institute of Sustainability Studies. So we're one of the leading education bodies supporting businesses around sustainability training, upskilling business professionals, enabling really to build capability across their entire operations from senior leadership to frontline workers. We provide a range of courses, university accredited, right down to bite-sized training. And today we are speaking with Alison Taylor, and we're navigating the new normal, forces of reshaping sustainable action. And really what we're hoping to do in the next 45 minutes is really take you through the journey of the current situation globally as it relates to sustainability, really the impact we're seeing on corporate sustainability, how businesses are beginning to change their approach to sustainability and consolidate and refocus, and really the movement towards integrating sustainability at each function of the business and really a focus on implementation beyond ambition. And as well, looking at how those everyday operations within the business really becomes part of the day-to-day working rather than just using sustainability as a storytelling piece. Without further ado, I will intro Alison. So Alison is a clinical professor at NYU Stern School of Business. She is also the author of Higher Ground, How Businesses Can Do the Right Thing in a Turbulent World. And that was named one of the top 10 business books of 2024 by the Financial Times and winner of the Portlight Award by Best Leadership and Strategy Book. So she teaches ethics, sustainability, and leadership and advises global organizations like Unilever, KKR on political, social, and reputational risk. With expertise across strategy, governance, and stakeholder engagement, she offers a grounded real-world view on navigating rising sustainability pressures. So, Alison, you're more than welcome, and it's great to have you here. And I suppose we have had numerous conversations prior to this about everything, both your writing in Trellis and similarly about how we can approach what we want to speak about. And I think as I posted about it, you really do bring a bit of a breath of fresh air when it comes to corporate responsibility, and particularly within these kind of changing times. But just to, I suppose, set the scene before we jump into a bit more detail, because what we have seen, particularly, let's say, in the last 12 to 18 months, some political headwinds, both particularly at the US side and how that's impacted at an EU level, and that they have been real. They have impacted
Yeah.
corporate commitments, both from being paused and pulled back. So I suppose from where you sit, what does this moment actually tell us about the corporate sustainability piece? And I suppose what are we currently, where we currently are within the environment and how that's impacted everything?
Yeah, so great question to kick us off, just all the big problems. So thank you so much. It's very wonderful to be here. So I guess what I will start by saying is there have been numerous articles, including in HBR and including in Trellis, saying corporate sustainability is not in crisis. And the only thing I would say about that is if you have to write an article saying something's not in crisis, it's kind of a bad sign. So I think there are a few things going on. The first thing I think we can say that is a kind of macro picture issue is that on a global level, things are still broadly moving in the same direction. I do think that in the EU, there has been an impact from the headwinds in the US. You can kind of see that. You can see that in the discourse around a topic like CSRD. But broadly speaking, I don't think if you look in Europe, if you look in Asia, if you look in Latin America, I think people pretty much live in the real world. And I think if we're thinking about a topic like energy transition or social impact or responsibility like around AI, you are seeing movement bumpy, but broadly still in the same direction. We have an administration in this country that is trying to drag us in another direction entirely. I don't think that is going to win because logic and reality still trumps anything that a government is trying to push. If we want to be really current, we're in the middle of this conflict in the Middle East. What could be better for making a case for renewable energy and EVs? So the macro picture, I don't think I have a problem with the kind of overall direction. That said, I think it's been a very challenging situation in the US for corporations in the last 18 months. I spend a lot of time talking to people in Europe, and I know how this looks from the outside. I am as probably people can hear as well, British originally. So I see how this looks. I think there's also, if we think about the protests in Minneapolis, for example, there's this sort of horrible spectacle where you see members of the public expressing a lot of courage and standing up, and in some cases risking or giving their lives, and then what appears to be a lack of courage from the corporate sector to stand up on issues like human rights and the environment and even democracy and the rule of law. So that's all real. I think there are a few things to sort of say about what's going on under the surface there. One is, I think, if you talk to any CEO or any internal team, they haven't really dialed back something like climate action and energy efficiency. There has certainly been a dramatic shift in how companies talk about these topics. And I do think that matters. That matters for momentum, that matters for signaling, that matters for strategy. But, if you're sourcing food, you don't think climate change is woke, it's real. And so there is some aspect of this where you see less talking and less PR and less fluff and a bit more operational rigor around these topics than you used to see. The second thing I would say is, businesses in the US and CEOs in the US are genuinely exposed. There are a lot of levers that the administration can pull. There are tariffs, which can be deployed and withdrawn to companies you might like or not like. There's obviously lawsuits. There's huge federal contracts. There's public shaming and social media campaigns. So it might appear to be, a lack of courage, and I've got some sympathy with those arguments, but these are not theoretical risks. These are real concrete risks that legal teams, I think, are for very good reasons flagging. And I think there are a lot of reasons why an individual corporation in America right now might think, well, just keep our heads down and, carry on and hope that this all sort of passes. So that's, I think, where we are. I think another conversation I'm seeing, which you referred to in the introduction, is around the evolution of the sustainability team and the sustainability function inside the organization. And I think there's a lot of very interesting stuff going on there as well.
Yeah, because I suppose that's one point I would like to kind of press into a little. And I think we have had conversations about this. As a result of that pressure, you have, as you said, we've seen companies shelve targets, maybe stop talking about it as much as they have done, and kind of reframe how they're referencing it, and also just, I suppose, bluntly, a shift in terminology and how businesses are operating this, as it's shifting from energy, energy efficiency, etc., rather than larger kind of, let's say, seen as maybe wavy hands terms.
Yes.
I suppose on that, does that indicate, I would say, prior to this shakeup, and let's maybe call it a shakeup, what was happening was never truly embedded within the business to begin with, are we seeing this kind of rephrased or pull into another part of the business? We're starting to see businesses that were actually doing it well in the first place and how it's fully embedded across those operations. I suppose we're starting to see the light across the whole ESG landscape, and I'm just interested to see what your input will be on that.
Yeah, I think the pushback has revealed who was taking this seriously and who wasn't. And I think something very interesting is if you're relatively mature in the sustainability space, at this point, you're thinking about this in procurement. You're thinking about this in R&D. Yeah. You've got ESG reporting under the CFO. So I think there is genuinely, for companies taking this seriously and for companies that are exposed, there is something that will not be pushed back. I think there is also a story around the companies that were treating this as PR fluff in the first place. There's no PR upside to this anymore at the moment in the US. So, that is maybe in some ways a good thing. We might say over the long term, we're seeing more rigor. We're seeing who takes this seriously. And we're seeing what's going on. But if you think about, we had in the US a few years ago, for example, really great incentives around renewables as a result of the IRA. And so the kind of political regulatory context has certainly become more challenging. But again, if we just look at the global level, and that's the other thing, if you're present in Europe or you're present in Asia, you've got a real dilemma because you need to align over here with what's going on, but you can't afford to drop the ball over there. And then you asked about terminology. I mean, I think there's an aspect of this where companies are, doing control X on DEI and ESG on their websites and changing their language. I think that's a problem. I think it is a problem if you're not thinking about all your stakeholders and you're completely changing your language to appeal to the government. That's something you see in populist authoritarian contexts, not in democratic contexts.
Mm.
But, and I've written about this a lot, there's also an element where I think sustainability did drown in jargon. We love
Mm.
a three-letter acronym. We love some really technical conversation. I do think, lost the room a little bit. And so if we're talking in a more straightforward way about water or pollution or soil or cheaper energy, and making more of a connection to the general public and not treating this as some sort of very esoteric reporting exercise, that's good. That's a
Yeah.
good thing.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that has been the case where, it's a branding issue nearly with
Yes.
the likes of ESG and sustainability, and it has been at fault because what it has naturally done has created a bridge between the benefits and the commercial value from risk mitigation and resilience development to this piece around we have to meet stakeholder demands because that or the public demands. And I think that was part of my question in terms of much of what we've seen in terms of sustainable strategy or action um, has been around those assumptions that regulations will continue to build and tighten,
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
investors will continue to demand more, and the public pressure will continue to build. But I suppose this period has revealed that those strengths of those foundations aren't as strong as we originally thought. And
Yes.
I suppose from your, and I'd love to get your opinion on this, that the real connection is businesses who are treating it as I said, a risk management, a resilience piece, rather than just we need to do this from a tick the box. And it really is a case of building strong foundations to support the overall business strategy, rather than just a being an add-on or an adjunct to what they're already doing. Um,
Yes.
yeah.
I think that's true. And I think the other element that's maybe missing from this conversation is the certainly in the US, there is an affordability crisis. Levels of inequality are higher than they were just before the French
Mm,
Revolution. So there's also a whole story, which I think the sustainability field has not been as credible on as it should have been, about living wages, about fairness, about good jobs. Interestingly, I think these topics are becoming very bipartisan. And I think if I'm looking at the emergence of AI and the kind of what you're seeing in the US is two things. One is a lot of job losses likely coming, and I think this is global, and I think that will drive a backlash. And then two, the data centers in local communities. And you're starting to see a lot of political movement around these topics. So I think again, it's important for us in sustainability to make that connection to what people care about. I think there was a little bit too much crowing about 2040 net zero targets and not
mm.
enough about, is that same organization paying a living wage? Does it provide good jobs? Is it ethical? So maybe we just need to get back to basics a little bit, both in terms of how we communicate and what we focus on.
Yeah, agreed. So we had Steve Rocklin on last week from Project ROI. So he wrote a piece really largely, or a report, should I say, and did a detailed report around that commercial value um, that can be delivered when businesses do sustainably right and do it well. And I suppose he emphasized that done well piece.
Yes.
Um, so I suppose my question to you is the businesses then within this current environment that have, I suppose, rode the wave, have remained resilient, have either, or have stayed the course because they see the value and the commercial piece around action. What have they done differently, let's say, to those when building that sustainable approach to action to those that have hampered, I suppose, in relation to the current times? What was how was their approach slightly different and yeah, how could they have stayed the course,
So I think there's a few things. One that we've talked about already is this
Mm,
is not a fluffy branding or communications
yeah.
exercise. You've got to treat this as strategic. So I think companies that understood this was a strategic imperative. So if you're making diesel fuel vehicles, you know that you've got an imperative to change because the electric car industry is coming. If you're sourcing food, you know you've got crop failure, you know you've got changing consumer taste. So the first thing is this a strategic imperative that can be built into where you need to go? I think the second thing that I would say is a factor of success is companies know what issues they're trying to tackle. They're focused on a 2 to 3, 1 to 3, maximum 5 really key issues that they're tying their narrative around, they're trying their strategy to. They're not trying to tick the box on 40 things. They're not
Mm.
treating this as a compliance or reporting exercise. They know what they're doing, they know what they stand for. So Tony's Chocolonely knows that it's all about human rights in the cocoa supply chain in West Africa. Chobani, which is an American yogurt company, is all about the US agricultural value chain. Unilever, even a company as big as Unilever, has gone from this kind of we're going to address all the SDGs to something much more focused around 4 issues. So I think there's also this sort of like, where do you have legitimacy? Where do you have leverage? Can you make a strategic narrative and stick to it that is incentivized throughout the business and that everybody understands? So I would rather see a company. People talk a lot in this country about Costco. Costco, for people that don't know, that are not spending their whole time in the US news cycle, you're very lucky. Everybody dialed back their DEI goals. Costco stuck to the point, had a shareholder resolution. This was supported by 98% of shareholders. Now, their DEI did not overcommit in the first place. It was never that ambitious, but they're looking a lot better than a company like Target that really kind of went out there on this topic and have really been forced to dial back. So there's something about knowing your identity, knowing your stakeholders, knowing the issues that are salient and staying the course.
Mm-hmm.
And I say that I'm in the middle of a day of teaching. And what I see in the classroom is this kind of obsession with authenticity, this skepticism about performative efforts. And my students would rather a company stuck to its guns,
Mm-hmm.
even if it's not as ambitious as another company, than flip-flops, depending on who's in power. So there's something about, I think, identity, focus, legitimacy, leverage, and strategy that is sorting the wheat from the chaff at the moment.
Yeah, and I suppose this is like I've always said this to a lot of people. We work with a lot of clients. We work, the challenge is actually just getting going and beginning. It's
Yeah,
not worrying about being perfect. Don't
right.
let perfect be the enemy of good. As you said, I think also from a strategic perspective, it's really trying to find your purpose as a business and making sure that from the onset, your sustainability strategy doesn't just sit on the outskirts of that, but actually is framed within it. Because as you, I suppose, alluded to at the beginning, the ones that have done this successfully has found that purpose, but has also then enabled and delivered that purpose down the various levels of the business through truly embedding it through it and ingraining. And again, there may be a sustainability team within it, there may be a CSO on the organization, but they've ingrained cross-functional integration when it comes to action on that. And I suppose, and again, we've kind of alluded to it at the beginning, but that cross-functional integration and as you said, the ones who have truly kind of embedded it, brought it in as resilience in terms of the business and how it operates. Um, what does that truly look like? And what are the kind of markers that tell you that, sustainability is generally embedded across the business versus a company that just says it is and has this flowery and bright strategy? What are those, I suppose, key levers there business can utilize? And again, maybe more so just from a learning for people who are listening as well.
So I think it's not necessarily that revealing to look at the sustainability team and the chief sustainability officer, because as I already said, it is now the norm, for example, to have the reporting part of this go under the CFO.
Mm,
So I wouldn't necessarily focus exclusively there on what kind of the chief sustainability officer is doing. I think you can learn a lot, of course, from disclosures and how the company describes its efforts. Is it cherry picking? Is it telling nice anecdotes? Is it acknowledging where it has failed or where things are complicated? I think you need to look at the governance structure. You need to look at who is responsible for these issues in the C-suite. You need to look at if there is board oversight, a board committee. You need to look at executive incentives. Are these issues being baked into, long-term pay and reward systems? Are they not?
hmm
Um, And then you need to look at performance. You need to look at whether the company has moved the needle on the issues it cares about. I think some of the other indicators are the things I just talked about. Does the company have a clear identity?
Yeah.
Is the company trying desperately to sort of cover 40, 50 issues and just report on them? Or are we clear what it stands for and clear what it's doing? I think there's a lot in that kind of acknowledging that things are difficult and challenging. There is a company I've done some work with, a tech company called Atlassian.
Hmm.
Um, if you read their sustainability report on the first page, and it's in very, very plain language, it will say, here's what we achieved last year, here's where we failed and why, and here's what we're doing next year. It's not jargon. It's not look at all the wonderful things we're doing. It has the effect on the reader of making you trust what else that company says.
Mm.
So there's something I think as well about you're not going to change the world necessarily. You're not going to solve the world's problems, but you don't have an excuse for not dealing with your own impacts, your own externalities.
Yeah, really good. I think, yeah, as you said, it's that authentic communication and external communication to the stakeholders that people really do value, and in essence, trying to overdo it can then hamper really how the business wants to operate. And I suppose I just want to touch on briefly as well, because you mentioned as I suppose we've seen this expand into different functions, procurement taking on more sustainable procurement pieces, finance or the CFO leading on reporting. What should and where does that lead? I suppose leave the central sustainability team's role, and how does that become what it should stop doing? Is there still a requirement for that function? Let's say
Right. Yeah. Good question, right?
yeah.
I keep having this conversation, and I've written in the past, including in HBR, sort of arguing the sustainability team should be trying to work themselves out of a job. I'm not
Mm.
sure I stand by that. That was a few years ago. I think we still need a leader to be the voice of the environment and society inside an organization. This is a very, as we know, fast-moving discipline. We need to understand what the company's material issues are. We need to understand what expertise is relevant. And I think you just do continue to need somebody that's got a clear remit over these topics. What I would say is it's becoming more integrated, perhaps with strategy, and so what's dangerous, I think, is having a sustainability strategy and then having a core corporate strategy. So I would maybe see that CSO and strategy role becoming closer together, or even becoming
Mm.
the same person, and I think that's okay. I think the other big area of convergence I see is between corporate affairs and sustainability. So if you've got true integration into operations and procurement and R&D and so on, then that does start to become a challenge of how you talk about these things and how you frame your efforts, how you align with what you're doing in the public policy domain, what you're doing with your employees. So I think that's actually one of the most interesting and challenging areas in sustainability right now, is kind of how you communicate around these topics. So for example, I've been doing some work with a company, very responsible company. I won't name the industry, but set scope 3 goals in 2020, has done quite well in meeting these goals in 2025. But as in the meantime, its measurement has improved, and its original scope 3 calculation turns out to be low by a factor of 50%. So then you've
Mm.
got a challenge. You're like, we've made progress, but our initial estimates were wrong. This is quite technical. Who even knows what scope 3 is? And I think that kind of, how do you communicate these things in a clear, jargon-free way when they're inherently complicated?
Mm.
Maybe one of the most interesting challenges out there.
Yeah, true. And it is. It's trying to bring that storytelling piece to quite a
Yeah.
technical thing, and a big thing depending on the business. It can be so large to connect that through. Um, and I suppose for businesses, and we've a couple of questions coming through, which we will jump to at the end. I think we'll have a little time, but for businesses then who, let's say, and we put ourselves into it, who are, and maybe it's a CSO, maybe it's a sustainability lead who has moved into a role, depending on the size of the business, and they see there is a need or requirement to begin to integrate some of these actions across the board. One person can't do this, one team can't do this. What are some of those bigger internal barriers to making that shift? where does that tend to break down if there is a disconnect between that sustainability piece sitting adjunct to the business strategy and also the team? There's no cross-functional team really taking hold of this. And I suppose how can they begin to navigate some of those barriers or get over those barriers?
Yeah, so I think one thing is you need a sustainability leader that can act as a translator and doesn't drown everybody in jargon and can make it clear why this is important to the business.
Hmm.
I think a big element of this, and this is kind of where we started the conversation, is around how you measure and calculate the business case. So there's a tool at Stern, it's called ROSI, Return on Sustainable Investment, where we look at how there is a business case for specific practices. So, and very often, and it kind of sounds unbelievable, the issue is not that you couldn't calculate the business case, but impacts and risks sit in different parts of the company. And we are very incentivized to think in terms of our individual P&L. So if you think about something like climate change, an organization might be tracking, as a matter of course, insurance costs. They might be tracking physical climate risk to their buildings or operations. Then maybe not quantifying something like the level of supply chain disruption from
Mm.
climate impacts. They might not be tracking how their climate position might help them attract and retain employees. So stuff like that. Interestingly, it's not that you couldn't measure it, but very often businesses are not sort of aggregating and understanding what a business case there is for specific things. I think the same thing applies to a topic like layoffs, right? We businesses tend to think about, well, one, layoffs tend to juice the stock, but two, we calculate the payout we're giving. Maybe we calculate some legal costs. We don't account for things like the collapse in morale if you're having layoffs. We don't account for the fact that then a bunch of people are looking for other jobs. We don't account for if you have to then re-recruit, what that costs.
Mm.
So layoffs cost more than people think. And it's not that you couldn't work it out. It's just we've got some P&L related blind spots.
Yeah, yeah, very good. And I suppose to go back to that storytelling and communication piece, because it is so key, and like as you alluded to there, that it's so vital, similarly for a sustainability lead within a business to try and bridge that knowledge gap in terms of what ESG or sustainability action actually is, how it can actually have a commercial value for the business. Um, so I suppose for companies that are looking at certain impact areas, they're looking, as we said, at detailed measurement of what they're doing. How did they go about, thinking about what they measure and then how they communicate, and how does that focus shift from, let's say, high level commitments to tangible operational impact, and how, um, yeah, I suppose how can they do that in an effective way? And you probably gave an example in terms of at Lansing, showcasing we've done this,
Yeah.
we're doing this, and we can do this. Because as you said, it can be very complicated, it can be very confusing for the let's say someone who doesn't have the knowledge in terms of the space that we would all do. But how can they begin to bridge that gap?
I mean, I think a lot of it, so I'm somewhat going to repeat myself, but a lot of it's like, don't try and do this on 40 issues. Like,
Yeah.
figure out three things that are clearly important to the business. Don't drown everyone in jargon. You can focus on measurement and direction and incentives around two, three things. I've never met a corporation that can manage more than a few strategic goals, let alone environmental and social impact goals. So,
Yeah.
I think that, it's why I make such an argument in general with how I kind of write and think. And there are counter arguments to this position, but I think I would rather see that focus. Like, pick a few material issues, make it clear that's what you're about, make that part of your story, put the effort in there to measurement, to incentives, to getting the business behind what you're doing. Don't be like Chicken Little, that the sky's falling in on a million things and we've got to do this thing because the stakeholder group's yelling at us, and, just kind of, it's not to say that the business case is always easy to measure, but I think you've got to pick your battle. I think you've got to
Mm.
talk the language of the business. You've got to know when to challenge. You've got to just kind of play this really nuanced and complex role. And not coincidentally, a lot of people I know who are in sustainability at the moment are really feeling a lot of stress and a lot of
Mm.
pressure. So I think there's a big part of that conversation as well. I mean, I think we do put a lot of pressure on these leaders.
Yeah, great. And I think that's one piece as well that we work with clients is again is try and showcase those wins, that helps
Hmm.
frame the narrative, showcase how you can build buy-in further afield as well within the business in terms of across those functional teams. And even if it is a case of just targeting one piece, piloting something, getting
Yeah.
success metrics and being able to communicate that through and clear kind of ROI or commercial value towards it. So I suppose we're coming towards kind of the end of this, and one final question for you before I just jump to the Q&A, and please, if anyone has other questions, please do write in. For people in the room, I suppose, who are leading an organization or taking charge, like what's one shift you would like to leave them with? Um, One shift in thinking, you'd want them to leave with in terms of at the end of this session. And again, it can be across, and I suppose a lot of it is going to be what we touched on, but it'd be great to just get insight in terms of one impactful moment.
I mean, the one thing I haven't talked about that I think is critically important is alignment with what you're doing in the policy sphere and across your
Hmm.
value chain. So a lot of the time, I mean, this is particularly true in the US. It's not exclusively true in the US, not exclusively limited to the US, but it is the norm in the US that your sustainability function might be doing certain things and making certain claims, and your government relations team and your policy and your lobbyists are doing something completely different. So
Hmm.
with all this pressure and political pushback and pushback on regulation, you need to be sure that you're not like taking away with one hand and giving with another. You need to be kind of aligned. And so I think the one thing I would suggest if anyone is struggling with this is get a cross-functional working group, get HR, risk, communications, corporate affairs, strategy in the room, and make sure everybody is clear on the direction. And that is yet another reason, I'm getting really repetitive, to have a few topics and not 30.
Yeah, very good. So one question here, Alison. Alison, from your initial remarks, I understand that maintaining certain sustainability strategies, actions, and targets could present legal risks in the US. I assume this is particularly relevant for DEI related initiatives. Are there additional examples we should be aware of?
So the interesting thing about DEI in the US right now is that the law actually hasn't changed.
Hmm.
It's just that the government and certain actors are using the laws that exist to argue there's discrimination against white people, basically. So it's more that the law is being weaponized in a problematic way than the law itself is shifting. And that is a huge challenge. I don't think it's going to end well, but equally, I think there is a story about the way that DEI was treated in 2020 and 2021, and it left itself vulnerable. I think the other thing I would be keeping a really close eye on, and I believe the Harvard Corporate Governance blog is good on this, is the sort of state level litigation around investing and fiduciary duty. So there are arguments being made in some Republican states, you can't come in here as BlackRock or whoever and say you're not going to invest in the industries that are really important in this state, coal, oil and gas, whatever that might be. Could not agree with it less, but there's logic to that. What I think is less logical that is going on and is really scary, and I'm just going to go ahead and say is dumb, is some of these lawsuits and these activities are saying it is a breach of fiduciary duty to even consider climate change. And that's when we start to tip into territory where I don't find that, I mean, that's just laughable on its face. So I think, there's something in here, like the first example, I think is a good example of maybe we didn't take enough account of how many professions and industries and livelihoods were going to be disrupted by some of these transitions. We maybe didn't bring those people along with us. And then there is a really, really bad faith argument that is just making everybody's life more complicated and is not going to end well. If you're running a business in the US right now, you basically need a state by state strategy, as if you're in the EU, because California and New York are going in one direction, Texas is going in another, and you need to think about all these kind of divergent directions. And so life's becoming more complex and expensive.
Yeah, so it's like it is fascinating, and that is one thing I think I've acknowledged is how divergent state by state can be in the US and how difficult that
And
can be.
it's,
Yeah.
yes, and we're almost getting to the point, I think in some cases we're there already, where you've got red brands and blue brands,
Yeah.
red banks and blue banks, red mattress companies and blue mattress companies. That's not good.
No. And I suppose we've been very, very retrospective on this call, plus also looking positive in terms of how people can go about taking action. And I suppose just one last question that kind of from your perspective, looking forward and the outlook, and we discussed this briefly before we went live. I'd love to get your perspective because how things are changing, how you may, because you're obviously living and breathing, but being based in New York. I suppose your opinion how things may have changed, how begin you might have seen some shifts between what we would have seen in the last 18 months. And I suppose having discussed about those positive nuggets in relation to businesses who have truly embedded action and changed it. What is your outlook, let's say, in the next 12 months?
Oh God, I wish I knew. I wish I knew. I think last year was sort of different. I think there was a sense of paralysis. I think between Minneapolis and Iran and the polling numbers, things are a bit more fluid this year. I think the midterms will be really revealing. And I think at least some companies are wondering what's going to happen into 2027 and 2028. But I wouldn't want for anyone on the line underplay the very real legal and reputational risks that companies are going through right now. I mean, in terms of kind of the long-term trajectory here, I don't think the picture's changed. The question is what's going to kind of happen on the road. The question is, are we really seeing the US undermine its competitive advantage? I mean, it's already, I think, undermined its soft power. How sustained that is? Can the US recover? I think we've already lost the plot on renewable energy. I think that's all China. But can the US regain credibility in Europe? Can it reverse some of what I believe are errors of the last 18 months? That's a bigger question, and that will probably affect not just everybody on the line. It's going to affect where I work and live over the long term as well.
Alison, it's been an absolute pleasure, and thank you so much for your time. That was fascinating, and yeah, look, thanks very much, and hopefully we'll get you on again soon as well.
Would love that. Thank you so much for having me, Niall.
Thank you. Thanks. Bye bye.